I am in shock. I am in shock. The Indiana Fever just beat the Aces.
The Indiana Fever didn't just win a game, they flipped the entire WNBA on its head. Without Caitlin Clark, they dismantled the Las Vegas Aces by 27 points, ending a humiliating 16-game losing streak against the so-called dynasty.
The first win for the Indiana Fever against the Las Vegas Aces since I was 22 years old. Aces MVP to refs, Fever's MVP and Alyssa Smith. You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
This wasn't a lucky night. This was domination from start to finish, exposing cracks in the Aces' armor and sending a message across the league. The MVP whistles couldn't save them. Legacy couldn't protect them. The Fever played real basketball and the Aces had no answer. What just happened in Indianapolis might be the most embarrassing loss in Aces franchise history. Let's break it down. When the final buzzer sounded and the scoreboard read 81-54, you could almost hear the gasp ripple through the WNBA fanbase. The Indiana Fever hadn't just defeated the Las Vegas Aces, they demolished them. A 27-point blowout win isn't just a victory, it's an indictment. And the fact that they did it without Caitlin Clark, that's not a fluke. That's a wake-up call. For context, the Fever hadn't beaten the Aces in their last 16 matchups. That's nearly a decade of losses, frustration, and second-tier status. Every time Indiana faced Las Vegas, it felt like they were outmatched before the tip-off. The Aces were the standard back-to-back champions, loaded with MVP talent, and praised as the next great dynasty in women's basketball. But on this night, they looked like a team that forgot how to play. From the opening possession, the Fever looked hungry. They punched first, racing to a 6-0 start and never letting up. By the end of the first quarter, they were up 21-14, controlling the tempo and making it clear that this game wasn't going to follow the usual script. The Fever came out with energy, focus, and defensive pressure that suffocated the Aces' star-studded lineup. But what made this game especially shocking wasn't just Indiana's energy, it was Las Vegas's complete inability to respond. Every time the Aces tried to mount a comeback, they ran into a wall. The Fever weren't relying on one hot shooter or a single player going off. They were playing team basketball. Multiple players contributed. They moved the ball beautifully. And defensively, they clamped down like a playoff squad. And yet, what was most revealing about this game wasn't just the scoreboard. It was the Aces' body language. Frustration, confusion, and finger-pointing were written all over their faces. They weren't just being outplayed, they were being exposed. The second quarter was when the wheels completely fell off for Las Vegas. The Fever outscored them to 5-1-0. In that quarter alone, shooting an absurd 81.8% from the field, while the Aces scraped together just 23.5%. This wasn't just a cold night for Vegas, it was a systematic dismantling. The Fever attacked the paint, forced turnovers, and capitalized on every single mistake, even without Caitlin Clark. The player every headline has been obsessed with, the Fever looked more connected, more motivated, and more dangerous than they have all season. Players like Kelsey Mitchell and Alia Boston stepped into leadership roles. Lexie Hull brought grit, Natasha Howard brought hustle. It was the kind of performance that doesn't just win a game, announces a new era. The Aces bench looked stunned. This was supposed to be a bounce-back game, a statement of dominance. Instead, they got out-hustled, out-coached, and outclassed. And for a team that's prided itself on being untouchable, the humiliation stung even deeper. This wasn't a minor upset, it was a seismic shift. The Indiana Fever didn't just win, they kicked the door open and walked into the WNBA's top tier, and they did it with authority. Up next, the officiating circus and how A'ja Wilson's whistle became the hottest topic of the night. By the time the third quarter ended, tensions were boiling over, but nobody expected what came next. Stephanie White, usually the composed, strategic leader, completely lost her cool on the sideline. And make no mistake, it wasn't random. It was built up from a steady stream of lopsided calls, questionable whistles, and pure disrespect. The final straw? That ridiculous jump ball between Lexie Hull and A'ja Wilson. White had seen enough, and she exploded. It was 5:35 left in the fourth quarter when it happened. The Fever were already up big, but the referees were doing everything they could to keep the Aces breathing. White had been pacing the sideline like a caged lion for most of the game, barking instructions, challenging calls, and shielding her players from the nonsense. But when the refs gifted another call to A'ja Wilson, she went off, arms waving, voice raised, jaw tight with fury. She didn't just protest, she lit up the officials. Within seconds, the technical foul was issued, and honestly, she probably wanted it. That moment wasn't about the scoreboard. It was about setting a tone. Her players were battling like warriors, and she wasn't about to let bad officiating derail their momentum. The message was clear: you fight for every inch, and I'll fight for every whistle. And right there, in the chaos, Caitlin Clark stood and clapped. The cameras caught her reaction, grinning, energized, feeding off her coach's passion. Clark wasn't even playing, but her presence was everywhere, and in that moment, she became part of the emotional engine driving this team. From the bench, she became the spark plug, echoing what fans in Indiana had been waiting for all season: leadership with fire. Stephanie White's eruption wasn't reckless. It was calculated. It wasn't about emotion, it was about control. She shifted the energy of the game from frustration to fury, from confusion to focus. And the team responded with a fourth quarter that turned this blowout into an all-time humiliation for the Aces. After the Fever didn't flinch, they doubled down. Kelsey Mitchell kept slicing through the defense, dropping daggers like a seasoned assassin. Natasha Howard turned into a menace, blocking shots, grabbing boards, and setting physical screens that wore the Aces down. And Lexie Hull, the same player who got robbed on that jump ball. She responded by locking down defenders and grabbing every loose ball in sight. Meanwhile, on the other side of the court, the Aces looked like they were crumbling under the weight of their own expectations. Confusion reigned. Chelsea Gray was visibly frustrated. A'ja Wilson, despite her points, looked gassed and alone. Nobody was stepping up. Nobody was answering the call. The Fever smelled blood and they didn't hesitate. They shut down Las Vegas. In the fourth quarter, holding them to just 7 points. 7. That's not just defensive execution. That's defensive humiliation. The Aces, a team built on dominance and depth, looked lost. And all of it traced back to that moment when Stephanie White exploded. Her technical was the rally cry that reminded everyone what this team stands for now. They're done being polite. They're done being pushed around. And with Clark cheering, the coach barking, and the players locked in, this Fever squad transformed into something terrifying. Coming up next, the quarter by quarter breakdown that turned this game into a basketball clinic and a blueprint for dismantling a dynasty. Let's be honest, scorelines can lie. A 5-point game can feel like a blowout. A 20-point lead can disappear in a flash. But what the Indiana Fever did to the Las Vegas Aces wasn't just about numbers. It was about domination, moment by moment, quarter by quarter. From tip-off to the final horn, this game was a basketball clinic, and the breakdown reveals just how thorough the beatdown really was. First quarter statement made. The Fever came out like they'd been waiting for this game all season. No, Caitlin, no problem. Indiana opened with 6 straight points and instantly put Las Vegas on the back foot. They controlled the pace, attacked the paint, and suffocated the Aces' perimeter game. By the end of the quarter, it was 21-14 Fever. The Ace-Kai's defending champs were shooting just 28%, struggling to find rhythm against Indiana's locked-in defense. Every possession felt like a battle. Every bucket was earned. The Fever were the aggressors, and Vegas had no answer. Then came the second quarter and the floor fell out. This was where the Fever absolutely buried the Aces. Indiana outscored them 25-10, but that doesn't even begin to tell the story. The Fever shot an absurd 81.8% from the field. Read that again, at 81.8%. They didn't miss. They carved up the Vegas defense like surgeons. Layups, mid-range shots, paint points, you name it, they got it. Meanwhile, Aces couldn't hit a shot to save their season. They went just 3 for 13 inside the paint, scoring on only 23.5% of their attempts overall. This is a team with MVPs, All-Stars, and experience, and they were playing like a junior varsity squad. The half ended with a devastating scoreline, 46-24. The game wasn't just slipping away, it was already over third quarter. The Aces tried to respond briefly. They came out with urgency, pushing the ball, looking for Wilson in the post, and trying to capitalize on a few questionable whistles, but the Fever didn't blink. They answered every Vegas run with poise, passing, and power. Lexie Hull hit timely shots. Sophie Cunningham made hustle plays that killed any momentum Vegas was trying to build, and Kelsey Mitchell kept her foot on the gas. What's wild is that even as the refs started leaning hard toward Las Vegas giving them favorable calls, letting Wilson live at the free throw line, the Fever never lost control. They played through. They used the bad calls as fuel. Stephanie White's technical foul mid-quarter actually flipped the switch. The players locked in tighter. The energy in the building shifted. Vegas looked tired. Indiana looked alive. Fourth quarter. The Las Vegas Aces scored just 7 points in the entire final quarter. 7. That's not a drought, that's a disaster. Indiana's defense clamped down so hard, it looked like Vegas forgot how to run an offense. There was no spacing, movement, no answers. Meanwhile, Indiana played smart and selfless basketball. They didn't just run up the score, they executed. Extra passes, smart clock management, and dagger threes silenced the few fans still holding out hope for a Vegas miracle. The final scored 81-54, couldn't even capture how thorough this dismantling was. Each quarter told a story, but together they told a message. A message that echoed far beyond this game. The Indiana Fever aren't a young, rebuilding team. Anymore, they're a threat. And next, we're diving into the numbers behind the Aces' collapse, and why A'ja Wilson's 29-point night meant absolutely nothing. On paper, A'ja Wilson had a decent night. 29 points, 9 of 18 shooting, 11 of -13 from the free throw line. Sounds like a dominant performance, right? Wrong. Because when you dig deeper, Wilson's numbers weren't just empty, they were irrelevant. And that's the most damning part of this entire meltdown. A'ja put up MVP stats, but the Las Vegas Aces still lost by 27 points. That's not just a loss, that's a collapse. Let's start with the basics. 11 of her 29 points came from the charity stripe. That means nearly 40% of her scoring came from favorable whistles, most of which were controversial at best. And yes, that includes the now infamous jump ball against Lexie Hull, where Wilson should have been whistled for an obvious over-the-back foul, but somehow got rewarded with a 50-50th possession. But here's the bigger issue. A'ja was playing 1-5 basketball out there. After Wilson, the Aces roster turned invisible. The next highest scorer, a mere 6 points. Chelsea Gray, the so-called veteran leader, and the player that some fans claimed was better than Caitlin Clark, dropped a grand total of 2 points. One made field goal. That's it. She also coughed up 5 turnovers and finished with fewer assists than turnovers. That's not veteran leadership, that's a liability. Let's talk shooting numbers. Excluding A'ja Wilson, the rest of the Las Vegas Aces shot 7 for 43. That's just 16.3%. Let that sink in on a championship-level roster filled with seasoned pros. Only 7 shots fell outside of Wilson. It wasn't just a bad shooting night, it was historically bad. And it wasn't because they weren't getting looks. The Fever defense was just that suffocating. They rotated, closed out, and cut off driving lanes like they were playing 5 steps ahead. A'ja's performance, instead of being a highlight, became a symbol of isolation. She carried the load while her teammates stood still. She made plays while the rest of the offense stalled. She fought for rebounds while the rest of the team watched. By the end of the third quarter, her frustration was boiling over. The body language said it all hands on hips, glaring at the bench, slumped shoulders, walking back to the huddle. It got so bad that fans online started joking, "Free A'ja Wilson," and honestly, it didn't feel that far off. This is a player who's taken pay cuts for this team, who's brought championships to Vegas, who's carried the spotlight and the pressure of being the face of a franchise. And when she needed her teammates most, they disappeared. Meanwhile, on the other end of the court, the Fever were thriving without their star. Caitlin Clark was in street clothes, yet Indiana looked more connected, more confident, and more cohesive than ever. That contrast said everything. The Fever didn't need one person to go off. They had 5 players moving as one. And that's the difference. A'ja Wilson can drop 29 points and still walk away with a 27-point loss. Because basketball isn't. 1 on stat sheets sits 1 on chemistry, hustle, and execution. Coming up next, let's compare A'ja's solo effort to Caitlin. Clark's impact from the bench and how leadership doesn't always show up in the box score. Caitlin Clark didn't take a single shot. She didn't dish out a single assist. She wasn't even in uniform. But somehow, she was everywhere. From the opening tip to the final buzzer, her presence on the bench was magnetic. And while the Aces crumbled despite their biggest stars, the Fever rose with Clark, leading not by performance, but by energy, emotion, and sheer leadership. We've heard it all season. Caitlin Clark is just a hype machine. She's only good for headlines. She needs the ball in her hands to make an impact. This game crushed those narratives, because from the sidelines, Clark became the emotional backbone of her team. When Lexie Hull got snubbed on the jump ball, Clark was the first to stand and clap. When Stephanie White exploded at the refs, Clark's eyes lit up with pride. She wasn't just cheering, she was invested, and it wasn't performative. The cameras didn't catch someone playing for attention. They caught a teammate who was living every moment with her squad. Every big shot was met with an enthusiastic fist pump. Every defensive stop saw her up on her feet, yelling encouragement. Her reactions were real, and her presence, it rippled through the roster. This is what leadership looks like when the spotlight's not on you. No stat padding, no highlight reels, just presence. And for a young team that could have unraveled under pressure, Clark's sideline energy served. As the glue, Kelsey Mitchell lit up the court with 25 points. Aaliyah Boston dominated the paint with 20 and 7. Natasha Howard looked like a player possessed, and all of them kept glancing back to the bench to her for energy. Let's compare that to what was happening across the court. Chelsea Gray, the veteran, the point guard, the floor general. She was supposed to steady the ship, rally the troops, keep the Aces composed. Instead, she turned in a performance that looked apathetic at best. 2 points, 5 turnovers, 0 impact. Her body language was sluggish. Her interactions were minimal. It was the opposite of leadership. It was checked out. A'ja Wilson, for all her talent and grit, was isolated, visibly frustrated by her team's performance, desperately trying to do it all herself. She got buckets, but the team energy gone, the synergy absent, and you could see it. No one talking on the court, no encouragement on the bench. Just a silent meltdown as the game spiraled out of control. That's why Clark's bench presence mattered so much. Because basketball is emotional, it's contagious. Energy spreads like wildfire, and Clark was gasoline. She reminded her teammates that they weren't underdogs anymore. She made sure no one let up. She helped them believe they belonged. And that kind of leadership isn't just rare, it's culture shifting. The Fever didn't just play inspired basketball, they played free. Free from expectations, free from pressure, free from the ghost of a winless streak. And that freedom, it came from the top, from a coach who fought for them, and from a sidelined rookie who's already shaping the franchise with her voice alone. So while the box score may have listed her as DNP, Caitlin Clark's fingerprints were all over this. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is believe out loud. Next up, let's talk about the real stars of the night. The Fever core that delivered a complete, balanced performance and buried the Aces without needing a single superstar to carry the load. While all eyes were on Caitlin Clark's absence and A'ja Wilson's solo act, something even more important was unfolding on the hardwood. The Indiana Fever's core showed up, and they didn't just hold it down, they took over. This wasn't a one-woman show. It wasn't about riding a hot hand. It was a collective statement delivered through hustle, chemistry, and execution so sharp it sliced the Las Vegas Aces to pieces. Let's start with Kelsey Mitchell, the roadrunner of this offense. She dropped 25 points, but it wasn't just a total that mattered, it was the timing. Mitchell's buckets were moment killers. Every time the Aces tried to swing momentum back their way, Mitchell hit a step-back three or drove the lane for a killer finish. Her shot selection was precise, her decision-making cold, and her confidence unshakable. She looked like a veteran who's tired of being overlooked hand. Right behind her was Aaliyah Boston, who turned this game into a paint clinic. She didn't just score 20 points and grab 7 rebounds, she dominated A'ja Wilson on key possessions. Boston's footwork, timing, and physicality frustrated Wilson, especially in the second half. While Wilson was getting her points from the line, Boston was getting hers through pure skill. She sealed defenders, made crisp cuts, and played with a kind of presence that makes opponents uncomfortable. Then there was Natasha Howard, the emotional engine of this team. The Commissioner's Cup MVP added 11 points and 10 rebounds, but her value went beyond the numbers. She was everywhere. Loose balls, hers, rotations, perfect, screens, brutal. She played like someone possessed, and the Aces had no answer for her two-way impact. Howard brought the edge, the kind of edge that says, "We're not scared of your rings." But this win wouldn't have been possible without the contributions from the so-called role players. Lexie Hull and Sophie Cunningham were absolutely fearless. Hull battled under the rim, fought for boards, and played defense like it was personal. Remember the jump ball fiasco? Hull came right back and made big plays on both ends. She didn't pout. She punched back with effort. Sophie Cunningham only had 2 points, but her impact came in other forms: steals, grit plays, and momentum-shifting hustle. She killed Aces' runs by doing the dirty work. Dive for a loose ball. She's there. Hard closeout on a shooter. Already flying. These moments don't show up in the highlights, but they're the reason the Fever never let Vegas breathe. And let's talk passing. The Fever finished with 24 assists on 31 made shots. That's a stunning number. It means they weren't just hot, they were connected. The ball moved like clockwork. Players trusted each other, and no one hunted stats. They ran, sets with purpose, looked for the best shot, and played every possession with urgency. It was a team that believed in itself. Contrast that with the Aces' stagnant ball movement, heavy isolation, forced shots. You'd think it was Vegas that had the rookie head coach. But no, Stephanie White had her team playing like veterans. While Becky Hammon's crew looked lost, confused, and frankly entitled, this was a game where the so-called stars sat back and the core rose up. No single player carried the load because they didn't have to. Every Fever player understood their assignment and delivered. That's the scariest part for the rest of the league in Diana. Just proved they can win big games without leaning on Clark Dot. Now, let's take it one step further, because what this game really exposed wasn't just a weakness in the Aces, it exposed the collapse of an entire dynasty. Once hailed as the WNBA's untouchable super team, the Las Vegas Aces walked into Indiana with swagger, rings, and expectations. But by the time they walked out, all they had was a 27-point loss, a shattered reputation, and more questions than answers. This game wasn't just a bad night, it was the unraveling of a dynasty, and it happened in real time on national television, with the whole basketball world watching. Let's start with what made the Aces great in the first place. Back-to-back championships, MVP talent, a deep bench, a fast, explosive offense. That was the brand. That was the myth. But against the Fever, that myth exploded. They didn't just lose, they got exposed. From the opening tip, they looked unsure, passive, and unprepared. There was no urgency, no chemistry, and definitely no fight. A'ja Wilson was the only player who looked remotely alive, and even she couldn't lift the dead weight around her. The rest of the roster, completely absent. A team stacked with names like Chelsea Gray, Jackie Young, and Kelsey Plum managed just 25 total points combined. The rest of the team shot a hideous 16% from the field. You don't win championships playing like that. You don't even win regular season games. The worst part? The energy. The Aces didn't look like a team that wanted to fix things. They looked like a team in denial. No communication, no leadership, no adjustments. When Stephanie White got teed up, it fired up her squad. When Becky Hammon got frustrated, her team just folded. That's the difference between a team on the rise and one that's losing its grip. And it's not just about this game, it's about a trend. The Aces have been showing cracks, execution, questionable rotations, and over-reliance on Wilson to carry them through tough stretches. For a while, those flaws were hidden under the glow of their past success. But now, they're impossible to ignore. You know what this game proved? The Aces aren't the standard anymore. They're no longer the team others fear. In fact, teams like Indiana are circling them on the calendar, ready to feast on the old guard that's still coasting on reputation. And when Indiana showed up, without Caitlin Clark, and still bullied them up and down the court, that wasn't just an upset. That was a shift in power. Dynasties don't fall in one blow. They rot from within. And tonight, we saw the signs, a broken locker room vibe. Tired legs, quiet benches, no plan B. Even the once reliable vets looked shaken. When Wilson walked off the court with 29 meaningless points, you could read it in her face, something is wrong. Meanwhile, the Fever didn't just look better, they looked hungry. They looked like a team that's been tired of losing, tired of being overlooked, and finally decided to punch back. And when they did, the so-called dynasty had no answer. What we saw in this game was more than just a regular season result. It was the official end of an era. The Las Vegas Aces are no longer the team to beat there, the team trying to remember how they even got there. And as the Fever rise, the Aces are left staring into a future that doesn't look nearly as golden. Coming up in the final conclusion, what this game means for the WNBA's future and why the Fever's win might be the turning point for a new league order. This wasn't just a win. This wasn't just a blowout. What the Indiana Fever did to the Las Vegas Aces was the moment everything changed. It was the night a rising team found its identity, and a dynasty looked in the mirror and didn't recognize itself. Let's recap. The Fever entered this game without their superstar, Caitlin Clark, and still handed the back-to-back champions a humiliating 27-point loss. It was their first win over the Aces in 16 tries, a streak that had spanned nearly a decade. For most teams, this would have been a miracle. But for the new-look Indiana Fever, it felt like destiny catching up. This wasn't one of those nights where a team gets lucky and hits all their shots. This wasn't a fluky cold streak from Vegas. No, this was surgical execution, quarter by quarter. The Fever dominated in the paint, shot nearly 82% in one quarter, and played lockdown defense that reduced the Aces to 7 points in the final 12 minutes. That's not luck, that's culture. And the most powerful part, this team didn't rely on one name to do it. While A'ja Wilson tried to carry Vegas on her own, racking up points from the free throw line, Indiana moved as one. Kelsey Mitchell led with 25, Aaliyah Boston battled in the post and made Wilson work for everything. Natasha Howard brought the toughness. Lexie Hull and Sophie Cunningham did the dirty work. 24 assists on 31 field goals. That's called playing for each other. But even on the bench, the Fever's fire was burning. Caitlin Clark, despite not playing, led in the ways only true stars do. She stood, cheered, clapped, and ignited every single teammate. She didn't sulk or hide. She led. Compare that to the Aces, where no one besides Wilson seemed remotely engaged. Chelsea Gray, the supposed floor general, had more turnovers than points. The bench looked silent, the team looked lost, and that's where this story flips. Because for the past 2 years, the Aces were the gold standard, the powerhouse, the team everyone else measured themselves against, but not anymore. That torch was passed loudly, painfully, and publicly. This game didn't just shake up the standings, it rearranged the entire hierarchy. Indiana's win was a message to the league. We're not afraid of your stars, your titles, or your whistles. We're here to win, with or without headlines. They beat the champs without their biggest name. And they didn't just beat them, they embarrassed them. The WNBA has entered a new phase. No longer is it a league dominated by 1 or 2 franchises coasting off legacy and star treatment. It's a battleground, and Indiana just proved they're ready for war. Every possession, every rebound, every timeout, they played like they had something to prove. And now, they've proven it. The Fever are no longer the future. They're the now, and the Aces. They better figure it out fast because the league has caught up.